It's Real Steel on Virtual Boy Works, Episode 3. You ever play a game that feels like a massive missed opportunity? That's Teleroboxer for Virtual Boy. This is a good, fun boxing game with tons of personality, and it's a must-have for any Virtual Boy collector's slim library. But the entire time you play it, you can't help but think, why in God's name isn't this a Punch-Out sequel? Teleroboxer shipped in Japan and the US in summer 1995, about 9 months after Nintendo suddenly remembered that Punch-Out existed and created Super Punch-Out for Super NES. The timing for a Virtual Boy follow-up seems like it should have been pretty much perfect, right? And wow, Teleroboxer perfectly reflects the entire Punch-Out concept, especially the original arcade vision for the series, which attempted to put players down into what was essentially a first-person perspective with opponents filling the screen opposite. Punch-Out in arcades presented the player's avatar, Little Mac, as a see-through grid in the shape of a boxer, and Super Punch-Out made Mac translucent. With its impressive sprite-pushing capabilities, Virtual Boy could have built on this motif by adding a 3D visualization element to Mac's see-through foreground positioning. You can't help but envision iconic boxers like King Hippo and Mr. Dream, rendered as massive Virtual Boy-style sprites, weaving and punching between planes of depth as players attempted to dodge their super attacks and counter with strikes of their own. But it was not to be. Teleroboxer is the Punch-Out game that wasn't, and there's a reason for that. It was produced by the wrong studio. Once the Famicom hit it big in Japan in the mid-80s, Nintendo divided up its software development into fairly strict silos. The Punch-Out games were a product of Genyo Takeda's R&D 3, a support team whose rare game development excursions were usually focused on creating appeal for Western markets. But just as in Game Boy's early days, the bulk of internal software support for Virtual Boy came from the division that created the hardware, Gunpei Yokoi's R&D 1. Nintendo's internal teams have always been fairly strict about keeping their hands off others' properties. In any case, R&D 1 never seemed especially keen to play in other teams' toy boxes. The one most notable R&D 1 crossover project, Super Mario Land, had mutated by its third entry into a game centered not on Mario, but rather on Super Mario Land 2 villain, Wario. Perhaps not coincidentally, a good portion of Teleroboxer's staff had or would work on Wario Land games, including its programmers, designers, and 2 of its illustrators. So maybe you can think of this as the Wario to Punch-Out's Mario. Rather than turn out some kind of interesting but not quite authentic take on Punch-Out, R&D 1 came up with its own take on boxing for Virtual Boy. Teleroboxer is essentially a classic boxing game, but rather than involve real human pugilists, it casts you as a kid remote-controlling a fighting robot. This echoes a previous R&D 1 creation, the Japan-only Joy Mecha Fight for Famicom, but with a first-person perspective rather than taking place as a side-on fighting game. And where Joy Mecha Fight consisted of robots built of simple geometric shapes, Teleroboxer features huge, detailed, multi-segmented BattleBots. It's a stunning game to look at with some absolutely brilliant sprite work. The entire game looks like Nintendo took that complex, multi-layered animation of Ryu charging up for a Hadouken in the Attract mode of Super Street Fighter 2, then built an entire game around it. It's simply gorgeous. And the action is every bit as complex as the animation, arguably to the game's detriment. If Mario Tennis was designed to show off the scaling effects of the Virtual Boy, and Galactic Pinball was meant to highlight its screen's parallax effects, Teleroboxer is ultimately a showcase for the system's controller. As with a lot of things about Virtual Boy, its controller was simultaneously ahead of its time and kind of a mess. It's shaped a lot like a PlayStation controller, but rather than featuring 4 face buttons, it instead has a second D-pad, shifting its 2 face buttons down and to the left of the second pad. The hardware designers seem to have intuited the dual analog controller concept before analog was widely available, so instead it's a dual D-pad setup. While this would come into play in the way you'd expect for a handful of 3D games, here in Teleroboxer the D-pads represent the robot's arms. It's a clever idea, playing up the notion that you, the player, are operating a robot using a Virtual Boy controller as a remote. But the implementation is, well, it's a lot to deal with. Teleroboxer gives you a lot of control over your robot, with each arm operating independently. This opens the door for very complex maneuvers. You can duck, jab, weave, throw wide side blows, block, swing a mighty uppercut, and launch special attacks. And you're able to do all of these things independently with each arm. Teleroboxer offers an unprecedented degree of control and depth for a boxing game in 1995. And it's really remarkable. Certainly the mechanics here put Punch-Out to shame. They also put me to shame. It turns out my pitiful lizard brain just cannot handle the number of options available for boxing in this game. By the time I reach the third opponent of 7, I find myself way in over my head. It doesn't help that the controls can be a little unintuitive for people who have played other boxing games. Most games, for example, allow you to duck and block by pressing down, but here those are 2 separate commands. Down causes your robot boxer Harry to duck, while you defend by pressing inward in opposite directions on the D-pad. It takes a lot of getting used to, and I constantly find myself trying to defend by pressing down and taking a punch to the face for my error. I played Teleroboxer back in the day in a demo kiosk and got trashed, so I always assumed that I just needed more time with it to get a handle on it. But no, it turns out that it really is that challenging. The game includes a battery backup and an autosave feature that displays your loss record at startup, so your failures are recorded for all the world to enjoy. I wish I were better at Teleroboxer because it's a marvelously ambitious game with absolutely phenomenal graphics. Each boxer is drawn with huge, beefy sprites and animated with a segmented style that allows them to duck, weave, and perform comical maneuvers with a sort of weighty fluidity, if that makes any sense. They all give a sensation of being colossal, jointed metal monstrosities, and their multi-layered sprite segments allow them to perform feats no Punch-Out fighter ever could. The third opponent in the circuit, for example, has the weird ability to cause his head to drop into his abdomen, rendering your high punches useless. I also enjoy the fact that Teleroboxer turns Eyestrain avoidance into a game mechanic. If you turn on the auto pause feature, Harry and his opponent will regain stamina between rounds. Turn off the auto pause, however, and only your rival gains a boost. Astonishingly, Teleroboxer includes an 8th secret opponent, a strange cat bot, that can only be confronted if you manage to defeat all 7 normal boxers without suffering a single loss. Bear in mind that this game permanently auto-saves your loss as soon as you go down, which means a single defeat en route to the final boss forces you to restart with an all-new, fresh save file. So, I don't know how to feel about Teleroboxer. I love its look and personality, and I admire its unflinching complexity, but it's so complex that I find it completely impenetrable. Going by comments I've seen on social media, I'm hardly alone there. It seems everyone who plays Teleroboxer finds it more or less impossible, in a decidedly un-Nintendo kind of way. Still, I'm not going to condemn a game for being hard because clearly complexity is what its designers were after here. I just feel bummed that I lack the chops to see the back half of this inventive, intricate, and visually magnificent take on boxing. Next time on Virtual Boy Works, sound the alarm, everything has gone red.